Hey, it's Jim, and this is level 3 of the CFA program, the topic on ethics and professional standards, and the reading on guidance for standards 1 through 7. Here we are in standard 4, duties to employers. Notice that there are 3 components to this. The LOSs are identical for all 7. Let's go ahead and look directly at the handbook here. Notice that the emphasis here is on cause harm to their employer. All right, so what must we do? We must act for the benefit of their employer and not deprive their employer of the advantage of skills and ability, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and start off with a really good question. This is very clever in its discussion. Let's go ahead and read the question stem, and then I'm going to make a comment, and then we'll go to the potential answers here. All right, so we're a former hedge fund manager launching a new private wealth firm. He believes the new firm needs, some millions of dollars in assets in that first year. So what he does is that he offers a $10,000 incentive to any advisor who joins his firm with a minimum of $200,000 in committed investments. Jackson places notice in the opening on several industry web portals and career search sites. So this is out there, right? Lots and lots of financial analysts are going to see this. So you're probably thinking here that, of course, there's some kind of a violation in here with Jackman. Remember up there, it does tell us that he holds the designation, but the questions look at it from the perspective of these advisors who are considering joining the firm. So you see how clever this is. So note the question, which of the following is correct? Notice that all 3 choices begin with a member or a candidate. All right, so you ready? Eligible for the new position if he or she can arrange for enough current clients to switch to the new firm. Well, that sounds like a clear violation of, what did we say back here? Otherwise cause harm to the employer. So part A, we're going to take some of our current clients and go to this new hedge fund. So we don't like that one. Part B, a member or candidate may not accept employment with a new firm because Jackman's incentive offer violates the code. Well, I'm not sure the actual offer violates the code, the actual offer. But Part C, soliciting the clients is prohibitive. Yeah, so what's the important part of Part C is that currently unemployed. So there's the correct answer, C. Notice the explanation down there for Part A, inconsistent with the code, even with the required disclosure. So I hinted on that just a second ago. And Part B is not correct because of the maybe out-of-work members or candidates who can make that arrangement through some kind of, let me go back here, some kind of a possibility in which there is no otherwise cause or harm to their employer because there is no employer. Our key points in Standard 4 on loyalty. I want you to think of this in terms of a hierarchy. So what did we learn in that last recording? Interests of the clients are always placed first. So you have the clients first, then you have the employer second, and then you have the advisor third. So if you think about that in a hierarchy, I think you can answer lots and lots of good questions here. I like that second arrow point, and this is a good emphasizing discussion inside of the reading, the sustainability and integrity of the employer. I teach my students this all the time, that firms have to make decisions as if they operate as going concerns, which means they're going to be around for way longer than we are, or at least with the expectations of such. And so that word sustainability, that's a good one. And then integrity, you can throw that word integrity into all of the 7 standards. Now, notice the second key point does not impose members and candidates to put employers' interest above any personal and family obligations, right? So there are certain kinds of scenarios under which there might be this need for a balance between the personal and the employment matters. All right, just a quick reminder that before most of these sections, there are a list of highlights. So here are the highlights under loyalty. So employer responsibilities. Yeah, employers must acknowledge the duties and responsibilities that they owe to the employees. Right. So think of the employer as an umbrella, right? And then, there's the umbrella that's protecting us from the rain and the snow and the sleet and the wind. And so what does that mean? That umbrella is a protection that describes those responsibilities. It describes the monitoring. We've talked about that before. It describes the possibility and the likelihood of assessing all of these policies so that we can avoid conflict. So notice that second bullet point up there. Members and candidates are recommended to provide to their employer a copy of the code and standards. I'm guessing that most employers have their own kind of a code and standards. It might be in a formal document. It might be just some kind of an informal process. But the important point here is that the Institute wants to have some kind of a formal document. And remember now, the Institute didn't come up with the code and standards overnight. This is a process that's been evolving, for, what is it now, 50 years or so. Now look at that third one. Employers are not obliged to comply with the code. However, we need to be super careful that policies that the employer has are not in conflict with the code and the standards. And so that's probably a good question, where the employer allows you to do something like this over here, whether it's with trading, whether it's with execution, whether it's with treating the clients, but then of course the code is over here. So remember, we always have to abide by the code. Yeah, I like this last one here. I try to tell my students that, when they go out into the workforce, what they're going to do is they're going to have the ability to contribute. And of course, they have the skills, the hard technical skills that I teach them in class to be able to make all these critical financial decisions, but there are soft skills as well. Positive working environment. And I tell students, I say, look, when you go in there, just make certain that when you sit in your first meeting that you kind of have a happy look on your face, and that you ask questions like, hey, can you explain something to me about this particular process? Like, I'm new here, give me a little bit of background about this. These are great questions to endear new employees to, the rest of the working group. And then, of course, the employer and all the supervisors, then they generally respond favorably. Generally, not always. All right, leaving an employer, the CFA Institute doesn't say, when you go to job for Jim's investment firm, you have to stay there for the rest of your life. Of course, that's not true. We know that financial analysts are going to move around. But the key thing is, all right, so we're here. Think of a timeline. We're working. And then on this day we leave. So right up until that day, we need to be loyal to the current employer. And that means every layer that you can think of, the Institute emphasizes here: misappropriate trade secrets, misuse confidential information, solicit the employer's clients. We saw that in that previous example. Or gather client information without permission. Let's see. Does not forbid the employees from contacting clients of their previous firm. However, of course, this list does not originate from the former employee's records, right? They may use public information. They may use any kind of other outside of the firm information, because we don't want to violate a non-compete agreement. And by the way, those of you who regularly read the Wall Street Journal, which I recommend all the time, there's tremendous push to kind of revisit these non-compete clauses. Now, of course, the Institute says, look, if you go work for Jim's investment company, that doesn't mean that you can't do anything else. The obvious scenario is that you come and work for me, Jim's investment firm, and then you have some children who play soccer or hockey or ping pong, whatever it is, and there's a foundation over there. And someone says, hey, aren't you a smart person? Don't you hold the CFA designation? We need someone to come in and work on our investment committee. Of course. Oh my gosh, we're encouraging you to go and work for that foundation, as long as it doesn't conflict with the interests of the employer. And of course, what does the Institute want us to do? They want us just to tell everybody about it. Say, oh, by the way, Jim, I'm going to go over here and do this. And, here's what we're going to do. And I don't see a conflict. Do you see any kind of a conflict? And then, of course, that open conversation probably will avoid any complications going forward. Social media, we've talked about this at length, and here's another good slide. But as it relates to loyalty, in this case, best practice should maintain separate accounts for personal and professional social media activities. I say this all the time. I don't know anything about social media, but my wife, of course, does. But if I were to know about social media, I would at least know enough to have my professional one, and then my personal one, I don't even know what I would put on there. But you guys know this way more than I do. So just separate them, right? And, the other part of this is that whatever you would do inside of the office or on a Zoom conference call or in a conference call with a firm, make sure that you use that same behavior inside of your personal social media activities. And by the way, this links back to our professionalism here. Of course, you don't want to have some kind of a social media post where you are, let's just take an example. Didn't I say this in that professionalism video? Suppose that you're at a professional sports game and you're taking a video of yourself pouring beer, on the pitcher out in left field or on a basketball player as he or she is leaving the court. You wouldn't want to do that. So there's a link here between loyalty and our duties to the employer, and then our regular old professionalism. Whistleblowing, of course, we've talked about this before. This has become a huge deal, especially in the last decade or so. Nature of employment. So, of course, we have a regular old employee where we have to fill out all the tax forms, right? And when we get our paychecks, we have all those listings of things that are required by law. However, you can also act as an independent contract. Sometimes these independent contractor agreements are signed agreements. Sometimes they are oral. But when we act as an independent contractor, we need to make sure that we clearly define the extent of the responsibilities as that independent contractor, and then just adhere to the terms of agreement. Here, another point of emphasis is, disclosure. Yeah, the employer is probably going to have restrictions on competing with the employer. So, there's that non-compete agreement. Clearly and fully explain. Termination policy, let's go ahead and clearly comprehend. So what are these last two? And probably even back here with this nature of employment, what the Institute is emphasizing is that, look, we recognize that sometimes we're going to leave a firm, and let's just make sure that we leave that firm with our dignity and our integrity intact. All right, there should be some kind of a formal process for whistleblowing. And, whistleblowing has this kind of a connotation of, some giant conspiracy theory, and I'm the only one who knows this, so I'm going to, rage against the machine. But it doesn't have to be, this giant whistleblowing that you read about in the Wall Street Journal. It could be just something like, hey, you know what? I noticed something over here. I'm not happy with my colleague. Can you explain that to me? That's kind of like the first step. So what the Institute wants us to do is to adopt the best practices of the industry. Yeah, that makes sense. How about employee classification? Yeah, so part-time, full-time, or contractor. This is obvious, right? All right, let's finish this part A up with a good question here. All right, we work for Generous Finance, an impact investing fund, planning to start a firm with his business partner, recently applied to secure a broker license. He has not notified his employer about his intention. Neither Fisher nor his partner have solicited any clients at their current employers. Has Fisher violated the standard to loyalty? Let's see. Boy, answer A, that's a good one. No, and there's a period there. There's not a no comma with a bunch of other words after it. Yes, because he has not notified his current employer about starting his firm. Well, remember that sometimes we have this idea in our brain, hey, I'd like to start a firm, and these grandiose ideas, and then all of a sudden we do a little bit of research, and then we decide, you know what, I just can't pull it off. Part C, yes, because he is not allowed to set up his firm before leaving his employer. Planning to start is way different. Yeah, so the answer is there's no violation there because we haven't done anything that has been disloyal. Now, let's go ahead and make this a different kind of a question. Suppose that in between sentence 1 and sentence 2, there's another sentence in there that says something like, you know what, we have done this and this and this. Well, then that's probably a violation. All right, how about additional compensation arrangements? All right, must not accept gifts, benefits, compensation that competes with or might reasonably expect it to create a conflict of interest. All right, so we talked about this in a previous recording about being biased or being influenced by accepting any kind of a gift. But remember what I said before is that the Institute, they don't want us to not generate any extra income over there, somewhere over there, but we need to make certain that there is no conflict of interest. Like what did I say earlier? Jim's investment firm, and then having one of our analysts go use his or her expertise for a foundation that's going to benefit, what did I say, soccer or hockey, whatever that is. On the surface, that's probably not a conflict. Now, there could be some conflicts of interest that arise with, raising capital or using competing brokerages, or you can come up with lots of those in there. So let's start with a good CFA question here. Ready? Portfolio manager, one of the firm's clients, has told Jurgen that he will compensate her beyond the compensation provided by her firm on the basis of the capital appreciation of his portfolio each year. What should Joyce do? Turn down the additional compensation because it will result in conflicts of interest. Turn down the additional compensation because it will create undue pressure. Obtain permission from her employer prior to accepting the compensation arrangement. All right, so let's go through each one of these, right? What does this mean? Will it result in a conflict of interest? It might, but it might not. Should we turn this down because it will create undue pressure, or should we obtain permission? So, of course, the answer is to obtain permission prior to accepting. Let's go ahead and talk about some guidance for these additional compensation arrangements. Notice what we have bolded there in that top block point. Seek their employer's permission. I mean, that's the key point of emphasis throughout this part of the reading. Now, of course, part of that is to make certain that the employer is okay with this accepting of additional compensation, but it's also a chance to have a conversation about conflicts of interest. And so notice the second block point, written consent, this can be documented, and so we can have this conversation, but as long as it's documented, then we have a record of it. Now, there's probably a good exam question in there on part-time basis. If we're doing this as such, what does the Institute want us to do? Discuss potential limitations. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, how about recommendations? Make a written report highlighting the additional compensation arrangements, seek permission, and then talk about the details. So let's go ahead and take a look at a good example here. Troy is a board member of Peak Animations, does not receive any monetary compensation for the duties performed in the role. So you're tempted to say something like, okay, since there's no compensation, then we don't have to worry about any of this other stuff that we've talked about over the last few minutes. But notice there is a however. He receives complimentary access to Peak movie premieres and Peak amusement parks. All right, so there is some form of non-monetary compensation. Now, the next sentence gets us somewhere into this conversation a little bit deeper into the role as the wealth manager. Mavis purchases Peak Animation stock that is suitable for client accounts. All right, so that's super important, that word suitable in there, right? So some clients want and have this these shares of stock that are consistent with their risk and return objectives. Some do not. So I like that word suitable in there. Does not disclose this arrangement to the employer. All right, so that doesn't sound very good there, right? Mavis believes he does not need to disclose because he does not receive any monetary compensation. Has he violated? Okay, so part A, does not receive monetary compensation. We've already addressed that. Yes, because he fails to disclose the non-monetary benefits. Yeah, we discussed this. But no, because the board member does not conflict with his work arrangements. And so remember that, that might be true, right? He's a board member of Peak Animations, whatever he does for our firm. That might not be a conflict now, but it might be a conflict sometime in the future. So there's that conversation about disclosure. So have we violated? Yes, because we failed to disclose. All right, how about part C, responsibility of supervisors? Yeah, reasonable efforts to ensure that anyone subject to their supervision complies with the laws, rules, regulations, and the code. So here's the task for us as good test takers is, what is a reasonable effort? Well, let's work through a problem here and see if we can find a reasonable effort. All right, we're recently hired by Fundamental Investment Management, junior auto industry analyst. All right, expected to expand the social media presence. We're active in all those different social media stuff. Although Burdett's supervisor, Joe, has never used social media, he encourages Burdett to explore all these opportunities. Okay, that makes sense. Burdett is working on a proposal detailing the advantage of getting Fundamental in Twitter, in addition to launching a company Facebook page. All right. She's completing a report on the financial impact of a particular company's solar energy for compact autos. This report will be in her first report. Yep, she believes that this company's technology could revolutionize the auto industry. All right, in her excitement, she sends out a quick tweet to the Twitter followers summarizing her buy recommendation for SunDrive auto stock. All right, so we hopefully, based on our conversations, not just inside of this recording, but in some of our other recordings, that there's a lot not to like down there. So, has Graf violated the code and the standards? Not Mary, because, what are we saying about Mary? Did she violate? Sends a quick tweet to her Twitter followers summarizing. All right, so is that goes back to, material information, non-public information. I mean, maybe Mary is one of those influential analysts. I mean, we don't know enough in this question stem, but of course, we're not allowed to make a buy recommendation to just her Twitter followers, right? We need to make sure that would include all of the people who are clients of FIM, because, I don't have Twitter. If she's my analyst, I don't know. How am I supposed to get it, right? But the question is, has Graf, as the supervisor, violated the code of standards? And of course, it sounds an awful lot like, what are you tempted to say? You're tempted to say, well, this poor dude, Joe, he can't be everywhere and at every place. But it sounds to me like, because he's probably not a social media guy, that maybe there's no formal kind of a process to describe the appropriate actions for Burdett. So, yeah. Failing to reasonably supervise Burdett with respect to the contents of her tweet. So here's what I was saying. He did not establish a reasonable procedure to prevent those unauthorized dissemination of company research. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right, key points. Responsibility to guide employee conduct in an ethical manner. So this is just super consistent with everything we've done in those previous 3 recordings, and of course things that we'll do in the next handful as well. Yeah, so here's the key point here that I was saying earlier. What is a reasonable supervision? let's see, number of employees supervised, the specific jobs being done. And so, you think about this. I do this regularly. So as a supervisor, you need to know breadth, right? How many employees do you supervise? And then what are the jobs that they're at hand? So do you need to know all the way down to the bottoms of the depths? Probably not. You don't need to know how they turn on their computer, right? You don't need to know what kind of font they use when they type up a report in Word but back here, clearly Graf should have said to Burdett, you know what, when we're gonna release this information, and by the way, you did a great job on this auto industry research, but let's make sure that the dissemination is appropriate. Let's make sure that we deal fairly with all of our clients, and let's make sure that everything is consistent with the code. Beyond the enactment of rules or the supervisor responsibility. So that's what I was talking about here with the breadth. You need to go this way beyond the enactment of those rules. It probably defines some depth, but not all the way down to the bottom. All right, here are the highlights here. System for supervision. You probably could just close your eyes and just imagine what this system of supervision means based on what the Institute has taught us over these 3 levels. Of course, a system means that, the employer, the supervisor, and the employee, we have some kind of a formal standard, right? It could be the code, but it could be something else out there for supervision that says something like, what, I need to know what you're doing. I need to know what's important. So notice the second arrow point. Encourage the firms to establish compliance procedures and then document. Of course, we need to disclose and document and monitor. And they should meet industry standards. Yeah, that makes sense. Look at the last diamond point down there. Must be established before a law or the code of standards is violated. Boy, that would be in a super perfect world. All right, how about supervision includes detection? Yeah, make reasonable efforts to detect violations of all the stuff that we must adhere to. So, of course, going back here, establish compliance procedures. So, that's kind of the system. But one of the action outcomes is that what we can do is that we can detect something that's out of the ordinary. And there we go, periodic review. So there's part of the whole monitoring that we talk about regularly. Yeah, this is not the first time I've said this or that we've seen this inside of the code. Recommend the employer adopt a code of standards. Of course, we know what we're studying now. This is a pretty comprehensive code of standards and ethics. So principle-based ethical and fiduciary terms, right? Compliance procedures. Should encourage their firms to issue a code of ethics to the clients. Now, of course, this is client-specific, and so it's appropriate as a supervisor to say something like, okay, here, you 10 people, you have all these clients, maybe you have 500 clients among you. You need to make sure that the clients are aware that we're abiding by this code and that they need to abide by, a code of client behavior. Yeah, so what are some characteristics of adequate code? Clear and accessible, easy to understand, easy to read. I mean, going through this, this is a super long reading, but clearly it's clear and it's easy to understand. All right, so appoint a compliance officer, hierarchy of supervision, extent of the procedures, and define permissible conduct. All right, so this supervisor role should include things like distribution of the content, continuous training, frequent reminders, yes, conduct evaluation, review employee actions. This is why I said to you, remember in just that previous recording, I said spend a minute or two going to the CFA Institute webpage and look at the violations of these codes, and you can read about what our fellow CFA designation holders have done in violation, and so review these employee actions. So yeah, take action to enforce. Respond promptly, investigate the scope, figure out what those actions are and say, what are the possible consequences. Review and update compliance procedures. That makes sense. Education and training, yes, regular ethics and compliance training. But, I've said this regularly. I'm not sure that I've said this inside of these standard recordings, but I've said it in other videos about, the importance of a chief risk officer who's in charge of establishing the risk culture of the firm, and somehow, somewhere inside of that risk culture comes some kind of ethics chain, an ethics culture, some kind of an ethics model and ethics behavior. And this has to be a system of where, we have this umbrella up here, and then we have every different layer all the way down to the ground, so that the rain and the snow doesn't hit us. This is what I was saying. Look at that first arrow point: a strong culture of integrity, ethical conduct, etc., etc. Appropriate incentive and structures. Of course, what we want all of our colleagues and our supervisors to do is to behave ethically, but of course we want to be compensated for our behavior, but we don't want to be extra compensated for our ethical behavior. We want to be extra compensated for our performance, but what we want to do is make certain that we do not place that extra compensation based on profits and returns over ethical conduct, right? So this is the old, what comes first? Did the chicken cross the road, or did the egg cross the road first, or the chicken or the egg? If you have this ethical, let me start over. If you hire highly skilled people and you train them to be ethical on top of their ethical training from, their upbringing and their teachers and their professors and their friends, well, then you have this behavior established, and then all of the positive returns and the high internal rate of return, all that compensation, that just flows, right? Yeah, incentive structure should be linked to the client interest. That makes perfect sense. All right, so let's go ahead and end with a question. Fabian Edwards, let's see, junior trader, primarily responsible for executing large trades. Let's see. Francesca is the compliance officer responsible for monitoring. Yeah, both of their bonus compensations are linked to trading volume generated over a financial year. Let's go ahead and scratch our heads over that one. All right, Francesca has noticed increased trading. She observes that block orders that could have been completed in one trading session have been split over several trades. All right, we don't like any of that stuff. Francesca fails to investigate the increased trading activity and does not bring this attention. All right, so has Francesca violated responsibility of supervisors? Let's see, no, because she is not directly responsible for the increased trading activity. All right, so this is what I was talking about earlier. So here's the breadth, right? And so then here's the depth. But so clearly she's responsible for that monitoring, at least monitoring and asking a question about that increased trading activity. I mean, it's a simple question that says, oh, I noticed that increased trading activity. Do you mind telling me how that worked? All right, no, because she does not know the circumstances surrounding, therefore she doesn't need to investigate further. All right, so we don't like that one. Oh, yes, because she fails to review. So, of course, failing to review, failing to monitor, failing to encourage the disclosure, all that kind of stuff there. All right, that takes us through Standard 4, duties to employers. Next up is Standard 5. Notice there are 3 of them as well for Standard 5. So let me just remind you, I want you to, once again, get out the handbook and look at those 39 or 40 questions, and I want you to read through them really quickly. Now look, this should be the 4th time that you're through them. I want you to read through them, and you might be tempted to say, wait a minute, Jim, you're forcing us to kind of memorize some of the answers, and that's probably okay, but I'm not forcing you to memorize. What I'm forcing you to do is to process how the Institute thinks and how they ask questions so that you can do well on the exam. So hey, thanks for watching and good luck studying.